Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. It is time for our monthly edition of What's New at Ancestry. This is for April 2018. Now, most of you may have noticed that we were a little light on videos last month, including the fact that we skipped the March 2018 edition of What's New. Well, that's because this past month, the first week of the month, was Roots Tech. Roots Tech is the largest genealogical conference in the world, tens of thousands of people in attendance. And if you were not able to be there, you can still watch recorded sessions, including all of the keynote sessions and many of the classes from the conference. So if you just go to rootstech.org, you'll see links there to watch the different sessions from that conference. If you've never attended Roots Tech before, it is quite the experience. So if you want to put the 2019 dates on your calendar, it will be held the 27th of March through the 27th of February rather, through the 2nd of March next year. It is, there are a lot of people, there's a lot of vendors, there are a lot of classes. It is quite the experience, but let me tell you, it took me a couple of weeks to recover from that event, which was why we were a little light on video sessions this past month. Let's talk about some upcoming events that you might want to be aware of. There are various things going around the country and one international conference that we have on the slate. These are the conferences that Ancestry will be in attendance at. So Ancestry will have speakers in attendance, we'll have a booth in the exhibit hall. There are a lot of other local conferences and events, and even sometimes where myself or Juliana or some of the other Ancestry employees head out to speak at those events, but Ancestry doesn't have a larger presence. So these are the large conferences that are coming up. NGS in May, coming up quickly. That will be in Grand Rapids, Michigan this year. The Southern California Jamboree in Burbank, California, of course, always a good time. That's the 31st of May through the 3rd of June. The International Association of Jewish Genealogical Societies is holding their annual conference in Warsaw, Poland this year, the 6th through the 10th of August. And then also in August, the Federation of Genealogical Societies is holding their annual conference in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the 22nd through the 25th of August. Now, of course, Fort Wayne is the location of the second largest genealogical library in the world, so I'm looking forward to that event. Hopefully I'll get a day or a half a day somewhere throughout that week where I can head over to the library and do some research and some original records they have there that have not yet been digitized and put online. Now, if you can't make it to one of these conferences, or if you're interested in what other events might be occurring locally to you, if you just go to conferencekeeper.org, you'll be able to find a complete listing of events that have been published there. Now, it's been a couple of months since we've talked about content, so this is going to be the content highlights for February and March. There have been more than 43 million records that have been published onto the Ancestry site. Now, if you've never joined us for a What's New episode before, let me just quickly show you where you're going to find new content throughout the month if you don't want to wait for one of these episodes. Under search, if you click on search and you go down to the card catalog. Card catalog is, of course, my favorite resource on the entire Ancestry website. It gives you a listing of all of the databases that are available on Ancestry. You can then sort that list by date added. It'll put all the new content at the top of the list in reverse chronological order so that the newest stuff's at the top of the list. This little new tag is left on all databases for 90 days. So you can, kind of keep up that way. Now, I won't be able to cover all of the new content, but let's just talk about some of it. We're going to start here in the US. So this past, actually this was a February database, the New York State Marriage Index from 1881 to 1967. Now this is just an index, so if I come in here, type in New York, I've got my list sorted by date. You're going to see here the New York State Marriage Index. I can go ahead and open that up. Now, one of the things you're going to notice is there is a browse box. Usually when there's a browse box, that means that there are images associated. And in this case, there are images associated. However, those images are images to the index. So this is an index that has been indexed and made searchable online. It is not the original marriage records. New York State has not made those available. And so this gives you the information that you need, the date, the county, the certificate number, so that you can order a copy of the original certificate. Now, the question always comes up, well, why do I need the certificate if I've got the marriage date in place? Well, typically marriage certificates, any kind of original documents, are going to have more information than what is in the index. So you're going to get things like sometimes parents' names and occupations and residence, lots of really great pieces of information. Next up here in the US, another new record collection we've released recently is the Massachusetts Compiled Birth, Marriage, and Death Records. So Massachusetts is a little bit unique in that since the beginning of their record keeping back in the 1600s, they have kept their records at a town or a city level. And Ancestry has tens of millions of those records available online. But this collection is a collection of compiled birth, marriage, and death records, so meaning all birth, marriages, and deaths are in one database instead of spread out across 3 separate databases. And they date from the 1700s through the mid-1800s. And one of the things that you want to get in the habit of doing is anytime you come across a collection of records, always look for the browse, because that'll tell you if there's images. The browse will also tell you what records are included in that particular set of images. So for example, there's 500 and some odd towns in the state of Massachusetts, but you'll notice not 500 and some odd towns in this list. And so this is does not cover the entire state. Once you find the town that you are interested in, click on that here in the browse. It'll jump you really quickly to a set of images where you can actually learn more about how these images were compiled and understand more about what's included in this particular database. Now, I do this very often before I ever do a single search, because I want to understand the records so that I know what the limitations are, so that I know what the coverage is, and that way I don't make assumptions based on my search results alone. So do a little playing around with that, browse around a little bit in those. Next up, we have London, England city directories. Now, those of you who've used city directories know what a goldmine these records are. Census records typically are only taken every 10 years, so we have these very large gaps where people oftentimes get lost or they pass away and we're not sure what's happening. And so city directories are a really great resource to fill in the gaps in between censuses and to help dig out more clues about our ancestors. Sometimes they also hold little gems of information about death dates or spouses' names or things that we might not be able to find any other way. I have actually solved a surprising number of family history brick walls using city directories. So they're one of my favorite resources. So again, I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to type in this case, London, and here's those city directories. You'll notice here this collection has 19 million records in it, dates from 1736 to 1943. These records were provided in association with the City of London Libraries, Guildhall Library, and the London Metropolitan Archives. And again, you have this browse box so you can actually see what is included. And then once you find something of interest, you can see, or a location of interest, you can see exactly which years are included for that location. Now keep in mind that the further back in time you go, usually the larger the coverage of a directory. So in more recent times, you're going to have directories that are more granular to a specific neighborhood or a specific village or town, whereas further back in time, those are typically going to cover a broader geographical area. Now, below the search box on every database on Ancestry, you're going to find two things. One is you're going to find source information, And that's where you can learn where Ancestry obtained the original records. Now that's important because that particular archive or library might hold additional records that have not yet been digitized that you might be interested in if you find your family members in this record collection. Below that source information, you're going to find a database description, and I always like to read through these because it gives me an understanding of what the records are that I'm looking at, what information might be available in them, how to use them, and then if there are any limitations to the indexing or to the database itself. And then once I've done that, of course, then I oftentimes will do just a generic search, just so I get an idea about what's going to come up in the index, what kind of information has been indexed, and then actually go through and view an image or two so that I have an idea. All of that, it seems like a lot of work to do ahead of time, but all of that actually ends up making my searches more successful and making my research time more useful than just diving right in. Okay, next up on our list we have the electoral registers from Edinburgh, Scotland from 1832 to 1966. Now, much like city directories, electoral registers serve as a really good record filler in between census years. It helps us keep track of people. It helps us sort people out. One of the challenges, and this is a challenge with research, no matter where your family history is from, but is particularly challenging in places like England and Scotland, where you have so many people who have the same name. One of the challenges is understanding how to sort out the same people with the same name. And so city directories and electoral registers are really useful for that, because it allows you to see, for example, how many men are there with this exact same name of William Sutherland living in Edinburgh in any given year. If there's only one, then you have an idea that the one that you keep seeing show up in records year after year is your guy. But if there are 17 of them, city directories and electoral registers help you have an additional data point or additional pieces of information to start to sort them out so that you know which one is your guy. Things like occupations, residence, voting status, age, all of those become identifying factors. Spouse's name, I'm trying to think of what else is included in these records, but all of those become identifying pieces of information that help you make sure that you've identified the correct person out of all of the people who happen to have a same or similar name. So electoral registers and city directories both are used for that, as well as other things. Now, next up we have school admissions and discharges out of Fife, Scotland. Now, I highlighted these because school admissions and discharges are just a really rich record that a lot of people don't think to use. And Ancestry has been acquiring several of these from throughout Scotland and England in conjunction with several of the archives there. These records contain detailed information. Here, if we go here, about the school that the individual was admitted to, and so then of course it has the admission dates and the discharge dates, but it also includes typically the name of the parent or the father, and sometimes it will include information about the last school that they attended, which is really great because if you've got families who are mobile, it helps you track them. And so one of the things that I want to remind people about is when you're doing family history research, don't get stuck on just looking for your person and their parents. Remember to look for brothers and sisters and aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and cousins. Oftentimes, you'll find the clue that you need in the record of the brother instead of in the record of your ancestor. In this case, David Davidson here, his father's name is Thomas. Well, maybe David isn't your ancestor, maybe it's David's brother and you couldn't find his father's name. But if you had identified that, your William had a brother named David, now you can use this information to lead you to the father Thomas. So one of the benefits of school registers is that it helps you track full families or other family members to give you additional clues. And then, like I said, those other locations where they may have lived so that you can keep track of people as they move, because people were surprisingly more mobile than we sometimes give them credit for, centuries ago. Okay, let's head down under to Victoria, Australia. Now, in this case, we have put online a set of asylum records. They date from 1853 to 1940. Now, I'm highlighting the asylum records because this is a kind of record that, again, a lot of times we don't think about using in our research, but can sometimes yield really rich or really beneficial information. The other thing to keep in mind is that asylums, sometimes stigmatized, have been used for various things over the years. Sometimes people were put in an asylum because they had some kind of a physical illness, not just because of mental illness. Also, historically, things that were classified as mental illness are not necessarily things that we would classify as mental illness today. And so you might have a family member in an asylum, and it might yield some information about the circumstances of their family, give you more detailed information about their birth, or about where they were living. But beyond just filling in the blanks on your family tree, it also can give you some context and some richness to the story of their lives when you understand a little bit more about the times and places that they lived in and some of the challenges they may have faced. So asylum records are really great for that. Again, you're going to see here this browse box over here that gives you details about which records are available for which locations at which times. Always scroll down and check that database description. It'll give you some details about what's included. And in the case of this particular set of records, one of the things that is sometimes included is a photograph of the individual as they are admitted. You'll also see things like, in this case, an alias. So for those of you who may have lost family members because of name changes, sometimes those name changes get recorded in things like asylum records or military records or naturalization paperwork or like criminal records of some sort. So always be sure to check out. It's worth searching sometimes if you know your family was in a particular place. And then, of course, you have just some rich details that are also included that give you some context and some information about that person and about their life. So asylum records, the latest ones that Ancestry has put on are from Victoria, but we do have some from other places as well. Okay, last two databases I want to highlight are both out of the UK. This one is the Registers of Employees of the East India Company and the India Office. These date from 1746 to 1939. And so I type in the search here because it just bumps stuff to the top of the list really quickly. That is just one of the ways you can use the card catalog. This particular set of records come out of the University of London. And again, if you scroll down here, what you're going to see is you're going to see the database description. And in this case, the East India Company has always fascinated me. And so there's some rich history here about what the East India Company was, how it was formed, the commercial power that the company managed to amass, and where they operated throughout the world. And they did operate throughout the world. And you may not be aware that you have an ancestor or a family member who served with or worked for the East India Company, but if you have rumors that someone in your British family history served in the military, it could be that they served in the East India Company, not in the British Army, because the British East India Company had their own private army that was about twice the size of the British Army. And so you can, if you're not finding them in British military records, maybe they were serving in this private army and the story just came down that they were, in the military. Well, they were, but it was a private military, not a government military operation. And so these records are just really fascinating for a lot of reasons, for historical reasons, for reasons of understanding more about the British Empire and about commercialism and capitalism and this concept of this private military. But if your family served in the East India Company, then of course there's going to be some very personal records here for you as well. Okay, the last database I want to talk about is the historical photos and prints. So this is a brand new database just released recently. There are 23,000 documents in here, but the thing that you're probably going to notice is there is a name search, but not all of these records are about a person. Sometimes they're about a place. And so I would encourage you to just use this browse function over here to go through some of these. There's all kinds of really great historical images in here. You can see just from looking here at the categories, right? Horses and hotels and carnivals and food and orphans and holidays and just any imaginable category. And when you get to a particular category, then you can go and see, for example, suffragette or anti-suffragette movement images. And so then you can come in here and you can see, I can go through this film strip down below. I can minimize the film strip and then just go image by image. Very often you're going to see a back of an image that's going to give you some detail about it. Again, just work your way through those. There's some just really great images that can give some context and some richness to your particular family history, and that will give you some understanding, some visual understanding of the times and the places that your UK ancestors may have lived, things they may have looked at, things they may have eaten, ways they may have celebrated. So I love images, and I love that Ancestry is getting some of these images available online. Super useful and super exciting that they're doing that. Okay, that is, there's dozens more collections that have been released over the course of this last month and the month before, so the last 2 months. But these are the ones that I felt like needed to be highlighted just because some of them are a little bit unusual, or some of them might affect more people and more things that more people might be interested in. But there are dozens more, and so I encourage you to go into the card catalog, sort that by date added, start looking through some of the things that that might catch your attention. Go do searches in some of those specific databases for your specific family members. The easiest way I find to search some of the specific databases is just by a surname and a singular location. For example, if I was doing a search in a UK or an English collection, I might do a search for one of the surnames that I'm researching in England and a specific county. If I was doing a search in those Edinburgh records, I might search for just a surname. So don't get stuck in putting in all the information. Just because there are a lot of search boxes doesn't mean you have to fill them all in. And certainly exploring some of those might yield some really great discoveries that add some richness to your own family history and family story. Well, that is all I have for you today. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.